I'm really a bridge I kept alive for them, for the present generation. I kept alive what was Cebu City.
𝐁𝐵 is one of the historians of Cebu, although I heard that he doesn't want to be called a historian. Rather, he would like to be called a writer of history. And I can appreciate that because, in truth, the book of 𝐁𝐵 is, well, figuratively speaking, sitting on earlier works.
I like the book in the sense that, look, his book, like all books, it's not just a product of his research, but if you go to the back of the book, these are also information taken from research with it.
A rallying cry for people to identify a common nation and love of country. But there are stories too in the regions and localities that should be part of the whole history of the Philippines. In recent years, a surge in research and writing of local histories reintroduced us to local heroes like 𝐿eon 𝐶𝐚𝐻, General Arcadio Maxilom, and others. To many local people, though, they're just names of streets.
Kaila bakang 𝐿eon 𝐶𝐚𝐻 na?
Wala. Kidya?
𝐿eon 𝐶𝐚𝐻.
Okay la.
Ang gitawag niya din sana god 𝐿eon 𝐶𝐚𝐻. Pero ako kitag tao, kakinsa ng tao nga 𝐿eon 𝐶𝐚𝐻.
Pamgrass, the Cebu Heritage Hotel, wants to connect the locals with their past. We produced music videos, published books in local history, and put the names of local heroes literally on the dining table. In 2018, we assembled a group of kids and tasked them to write a book about 𝐿eon 𝐶𝐚𝐻 for children.
I first heard about 𝐿eon 𝐶𝐚𝐻 when I was looking for something to read at my house.
My Araling Palipunan teacher was lecturing about
Mismo.
to know about our past and how we got our freedom.
I'm really happy that I got to work with professionals because I just did art as a hobby.
Maayong hapon kaninyong tanan. Welcome to the launch of the Japanese community in Cebu, 1900 to 1945, here at Palmgrass, the Cebu Heritage Hotel. My name is Regina Yoma from the University of San Carlos Museum, and it is with great pleasure to be invited to be your host this afternoon. We would like to acknowledge our guests here at Palmgrass and, of course, our viewers online tuning in via Facebook. We have Cebu Doctors University, Negros Oriental State University, Bayawan Santa Catalina Campus, Cebu Technological University, Academia de San Martin Incorporated, Cebu Normal University, University of San Carlos, and Archivo 1984. The Japanese Community in Cebu, 1900 to 1945, is a book which attempts to trace the history of a small but commercially significant expatriate community in Cebu during the American colonial period and determine its fate during the subsequent Japanese occupation and eventual U.S. liberation of the island in 1945. With the aid of published as well as unpublished materials found in the Philippines and in Japan, the authors provide details that have remained unknown or have been simply forgotten. The authors hope that with this slim volume, the doors shall have been opened, as it were, for more research into this once vibrant community that got swept into the vagaries of war and its aftermath. At this point, we are very much privileged to have with us today the Consul General of Japan in Cebu, none other than Mr. Hideki Yamaji, to give us a message.
Miss 𝐂𝐨𝐦𝐦𝐻𝐚𝐳𝐤, CEO, Thursday Abril Gen Service Inc., Palmgrass, the Cebu Heritage Hotel, Dr. Jose Elizar R. Bersales, University of San Carlos, Dr. Taihei Okada, Tokyo University, distinguished guests, and ladies and gentlemen. It is my great honor and pleasure to attend this book launching ceremony. Congratulations on the release of the new book. The Japanese community in Cebu, 1900 to 1945. This is the book I wanted to read most when I arrived here in Cebu last May. As Consul General of Japan, one of my missions is to deepen ties between Japan and Cebu. But how can I fulfill this mission without understanding the history between Japan and Cebu, especially before the World War II? So I did my amateurish research on my own, but of course, it remains within the realm of the amateur. From this viewpoint, I should be the first one to be more than welcome the release of this epoch-making book. This is also the book everyone who has interest in Japan-Cebu relations and Japan-Philippines relations should read. History always enlightens us as to what we should do and we should not do. It also helps us to gain wisdom to overcome challenges and difficulties. In that sense, this book should be a significant step forward for deepening our ties between Japan and Cebu. I would like to express my sincere appreciation to the authors of the book, Dr. Bersales and Dr. Okada, for making this achievement. And I also would like to express my deepest respect to the Sumitomo Foundation and JSP Kakenhi for funding this project, and to Thursday Abril Gen Service Inc. for publishing this book. Thank you very much. Daghang salamat. Okay.
Thank you very much, Consul General Hideki Yamaji. At this point, we would like to present a copy of the book, The Japanese Community in Cebu, to be presented by the authors themselves, Dr. Okada and Dr. Bersales. Thank you very much, Mr. Yamaji, for gracing this momentous occasion with us. At this point, I would like to acknowledge our audience here live at the Cebu Palmgrass Hotel. We have people from Museo Sugbo, the Provincial Museum of Cebu. We have, of course, people from representing the National Museum Central Visayas. We have guests from the Japanese Association Cebu, Kazuhito Matsuda. Welcome, sir. And we also have from the University of Melbourne, Dr. Ana Maria Teresa Labrador. And we have Engineer 𝐂𝐨𝐸𝐹 from the National Museum of the Philippines as well. Hello, ma'am. Welcome. All right. At this point, we have Ms. Agripina Givelondo, the CEO of Tres de Abril Incorporated and Palmgrass, the Cebu Heritage Hotel, to give a message from the publisher. Let's watch this video.
To our esteemed book authors, Dr. Jobers Reynes Bersales and Dr. Taihei Okada, to our partners in our heritage advocacy, the heritage community in Cebu, to our guests of honor, the President of the Japanese Association of Cebu, Mr. Kazuhito Matsuda, to the Consul General of Japan in Cebu, Mr. Hideki Yamaji, to Cebu City Mayor Honorable Michael Rama, maayong hapon. When historian and archaeologist Dr. Jobers Reynes Bersales offered Palmgrass the Cebu Heritage Hotels Publishing, Music, and Film Production Company, Tres de Abril General Services Incorporated, to publish this book, The Japanese Community in Cebu 1900 to 1945. We readily accepted because of our commitment to promote, advance, and bring Cebu history closer to the Cebuano community, especially to the young generations. There have been books on the battles fought between the Cebu guerrillas and the Yusafe against the Japanese forces. But in this book, we are able to travel back to pre-war Cebu and know the details of how the Japanese community engaged in business with Cebuanos, how the Cebuanos interacted with the Japanese merchants, and how Cebuanos, Chinese, and the Japanese civilians in Cebu reacted to the Japanese invasion of China and the Southeast Asia, including the Philippines and particularly the Japanese invasion of Cebu. This book is indeed very valuable as we would read here details of the Japanese military atrocities against Cebuano civilians and even against the Japanese civilians. We would know more of the details of the comfort women in comfort stations in different areas in Cebu. Most importantly, the book tells us very touching stories of the aftermath after the Japanese surrender in 1945. Palmgrass, the Cebu Heritage Hotel, and Tres de Abril Incorporated are proud to add this book to the very important books that we published on Cebu history during the Spanish period. 𝐂𝐴𝐨𝐿𝐴𝐻, The Untold Story of the 1898 Cebu Revolution by Emil Hostimbaste. Si Leon Kilat og ang Sigbin nga gisugilon sa mga Sugbuanong bata. Leon Kilat and the Sigbin as told by Cebuano children, and A Short History of Cebu, 1500 to 1890s, and the Anti-Spanish Revolution in Cebu by Dionisio C. We publish these books about stories of Cebu's past as we carry on with our heritage advocacy, since we believe that we can only look forward to a better future when we rediscover the glories and bravery of our past and successfully wield the lessons for the benefit of everyone. Daghang salamat.
Thank you, Ms. Gabilondo, for that message, and thank you for publishing yet another promising book on Cebuano history. And now, let us hear from the authors themselves of the Japanese community in Cebu, 1900 to 1945. First, we have Dr. Jose Eleazar R. Bersales, or Jobers. He is the director of the University of San Carlos Museum and the head of the NCCA National Committee on Museums. He is also a full professor at the USC Department of Anthropology, Sociology, and History. Jobbers is also a co-project leader of the Northern Cebu Archaeological Project. He was a German academic exchange scholar at the University of Bielefeld in Germany in 1997 until 1999, and an ASEAN graduate scholar at the Asia Research Institute, National University of Singapore in 2006. He holds a PhD in anthropology with an archaeology dissertation from the University of San Carlos on an educational partnership program with the New Mexico State University in Las Cruces, New Mexico, USA. He also holds an MA in Philippine Studies from UP Diliman. Jobbers has written or co-authored a number of heritage books, including the National Book Award finalist, The War in Cebu, and Salapi, the Numismatic Heritage of the Philippines, which won an Anvil Gold and Anvil Platinum in the 50th Anvil Awards in 2014. His latest works now in press include Colonial Philately, the Stamps and Postal History of the Philippine Colonial Period, to be published by Vibal Foundation. Starting next week, he will be based at the School of Humanities and the Institute of Laser Engineering in Osaka University as a visiting full professor until the end of this year. Ladies and gentlemen, help me welcome Dr. 𝐂𝐨𝐸𝐿𝐴ZAR Reynes Bersales.
PowerPoint presentation, which we presented with Dr. Taihei Okada. Which we presented with Dr. Taihei Okada at the 5th Philippine Conference, Philippine Studies Conference in Japan, which was chaired by Dr. Okada at Tokyo University, Kumaba campus in late November to early December. So the contents of the book are on the first two chapters I wrote, and the next two chapters by Dr. Okada, and we contributed on the final chapter. Okay, so let's proceed to the next slide, please. The next photo. I have to have a photo because Sumitomo Foundation will require me to be photographed. So Cebu in the Japanese and the pre-war in the pre-war period, the Cebu Japanese in the pre-war period were traced by us through records at the Cebuano Study Center, especially periodicals like Bagong Kusog, Nueva Fuerza, and Progress. We also looked at census records. I was able to interview a few, less than a handful of third or fourth generation Japanese descendants, and the records of the Nikkei Jinkai were available, Excuse me. Next, please. In terms of the census in the Philippines, which you will read in the book, there were a lot of Japanese in the towns, especially Oslo. The microphone is not Japanese, I think. Okay. So you see, Argao had one male, Balamban, Bogo, but there were 34 in the 1903 and 1918 census. And Oslo had 18. Oslo had Moroami fishing, which is briefly discussed in the book, and which later gave way to the infamous Moroami cases of the post-war period. Okay, this fishermen may have been from Okinawa, as Dr. Taihei Okada traced one of them, the Nakajimes, which started a Cebu fishing company in Cebu, but which was based in Oslo. And I think some of them married Cebuana wives. Okay, next. So this is when you look at the 1939 census, you already have 522 male Japanese and 101 female Japanese. Most of them are their wives or probably their children. But there were brothels here. We just were not able to trace these brothels before the war, which had Japanese women, other than our own women. Okay, next. So in the book, you will find a list of all the advertisements of Japanese bazaars. No? The Japanese bazaars were quite famous in Cebu because they were very clean, neat, and arranged, like a typical Japanese in Japan today. They were often compared, I do not put it in the book, but they were often compared with Chinese bazaars, which were topsy-turvy, no? Compared to Japanese bazaars. So the first entry, for example, of Satsuma vases that you find in Bolhoon today, they were bought here from these Japanese bazaars. Among them, the oldest would be Bazaar 𝐂𝐚𝐮𝐲, which means kumusta, no? Later renamed Taisho Bazaar, named after the Taisho Emperor, who was the father of Emperor Hirohito, the Showa Emperor. They have Honest Bazaar and so on and so forth, up to Tokyo Bazaar. We were able to trace the owners of them, and supposed to be we were to trace the memoirs of one who ran Osaka Bazaar, which was left in Japan, a copy of which was brought by Dr. Rico Jose in Manila, but he could no longer find the memoirs. He would have discussed parts of it in Cebu. Jaja is here. Jaja of Waseda University is on spring break. Speaks very good Japanese. And Dr. Jaja, she also presented on the videos which were recovered of the Philippines made by the Matsuo family, no? I think Matsuo family. Matsui family. When Osaka Bazaar or the Osaka and Osaka Kaisha was finally sold off in the recently, and the family started inventorying all the objects, and they found in the storage all these homemade videos, which are, I think, now available to scholars to a certain extent, because for a time the family did not allow it. I think there was a memoir, a photocopy of the memoir, which would have discussed about Cebu and its vibrant community. That will be for the revised edition of the book. Next slide, please. So you have specialty stores like Masunosuke Tsunada, who sold bicycles, who made bicycles in Cebu. He manufactured bicycles in Cebu. If you're familiar with how Yamashita attacked Singapore, no? They ran out of fuel already by the time they reached Singapore. The British had bombarded all the bridges along the road from Malaya to Singapore. Why was it that? Why were the Japanese troops able to enter Singapore despite the lack of fuel? They brought with them bicycles. The Japanese are so good with bicycle manufacturing. Today, I think you are still familiar with so many of these Japanese bicycle brands. In fact, all these Japanese surplus shops, you see them outside, they sell bicycles. But at this time, Masunosuke Tsunada manufactured bicycles. He was once a member of Mori Bicycle Company. He established a branch here, and he later left Mori and established his own bicycle company. And he had full-page advertisements at Bagong Kusog at the time when the Philippines and the rest of the world was undergoing economic depression. Remember, from 1929 to 1937, the world market collapsed. The United States Stock Exchange collapsed, which caused the Great Depression. But by 1934, you have all these Japanese companies advertising, and the Chinese would have only very little. Now, I have another book coming out, The Chinese in Cebu, which will be published by Jesuit House of 1730 owner Jimmy C. There you will find, there I will do justice to the Chinese stores. But here, this is a Japanese talk, so I will not talk about those stores. But they were competing in Bagong Kusog. Their advertisements were competing against each other, the same products. The Chinese were also selling Japanese goods. Remember, if you're familiar with history of business in the Philippines, but in 1903, the United States and Britain were leading traders, shippers in the Philippines. But by 1918, and especially 1924, you'd have only about, I think in the book, 237 American ships, but there'd be 400 or something Japanese ships coming to Cebu, coming to Manila, Zamboanga, Jolo, Iloilo, Tacloban, and Legazpi. And they were all from Japan. They were all bringing products. There's a list there of all the products from Japan. They're almost like the same things that are sold in Japanese surplus shops today. The Japanese brought us, of course, two words which we still use today, katol and takuri. Takuri, the teapot, takuri, is called takuri today by Cebuanos. And our mosquito coil, katoresenko, kator, Japanese katol, kator. No? They left us today. And I think kura, but I've been trying to trace where the word kura comes from. It's not in Japanese. And next. Then there is I tried to trace the locations of these stores on the basis of the numbers of the stores on Magallanes, on Colon Street, at the corner of Borromeo. Most of the Japanese stores were on Magallanes towards Borromeo Street. No? Especially at the corner where you find McDonald's today between Colon and Borromeo was Taihei Bazaar. The most famous, the biggest of one of the biggest of them all. No? Taihei originally started at F. Calderon near Freedom Park. And Louis Nacorda is mentioned, Dr. Nacorda. Dr. Nacorda, please stand. He's one of my informants in the book, my latest informants. His grandmother owned a store which was rented partly by Taihei Bazaar. And the owner of Taihei Bazaar was able to, I think the owner was Morata, Ichi Morata. And I have another guest here, Jason Morata, who I think is related to Eiichi Morata. They still have not traced their family history, but he is clearly Japanese. There is no Cebuano name Morata or Spanish. So he has to trace that, especially because it is easy for you to go to Japan if you're able to trace your Japanese ancestry. No? As a journalist, it's important. So Taihei Bazaar was later moved to the mainstream. No? And during the war, as I mentioned in the book, Louis' grandmother and their family could go from town to town because they were given a pass by the owner of Taihei Bazaar, who by then was conscripted by the Japanese imperial forces. All the Japanese civilians, you will learn later from Dr. Okada, were conscripted, forced to join the Imperial Japanese Army, or they would be arrested or imprisoned if they did not do that. So many Cebuanos think it's only Cebuanos that suffer during the Japanese occupation. We will show there that Japanese civilians lost their power, lost their money, lost everything during the imperial, especially during the invasion, because the Yusafe burned the downtown area accidentally, kuno, no? Okay, next. So there were certain events that affected the Japanese in the pre-war period that are mentioned there. The anti-Japanese boycott of 1931-32 as a result of the attack of the Japanese invasion of Manchuria and the declaration of the Japanese-sponsored Republic of Manchuria. There were many Chinese who boycotted shops, the Japanese shops here. There are incidents that are mentioned there when one Chinese whose wife bought a takuri, an electric heater, the water percolator, threw the percolator in front of a Japanese store, no, and things like that. There is also then establishment of the Japanese school in 1935, and I think the Japanese school today is occupied by the Lahug Elementary School, and that building, if it still stands, should still be there. The five classroom building that is still at Lahug Elementary School. There were also Japanese fishermen who were arrested in the Bantayan. By the time of the 1930s, the Japanese were already superior in terms of fishing in the Philippines. They had monopolized most of the fishing industry already in the Philippines. Then there's the novel of Grimmer Chan Reyes of Bogo. He is still alive. In fact, he was interviewed recently, and he talks of what he calls Major Mutaizo, who was a very kind Japanese. No, we have two stories of Japanese who were very nice, very kind to civilians because they were already here before the war. No? And then Marben Bascon, not Gascon. Marben, where is Marben is there. Marben talks of a Japanese spy in Talisay, although there has never been any proof that the Japanese sent spies in the pre-war period. There are many who say that they were people who were sent to spy. What happened was they were conscripted during the war so that the civilian merchant you found who was your friend, like Eiichi Murata, suddenly became an interpreter, for example, of the Kempeitai and carried a Japanese Kempeitai military uniform, probably of a sergeant or a lieutenant. So people immediately think, he was spying for us, for the Japanese. No, they were conscripted during the war. And so people think that they were already officers when they arrived. I think there's only 1 or 2 cases in Manila who were really sent to look for maps of the Philippines to bring back to Japan in the 1930s. That's the only case, I think. No? Next. Wait. The story of Marben's article is that one of the bishops today, the auxiliary bishop, is actually a great-grandson of a Japanese. No? One of the auxiliary, Sekuan. What's his name? The auxiliary bishop of Cebu. Bishop Labajo, yes. Ruben Labajo, yes. No? Okay. And then these are some of the notable Japanese in Cebu. Eiichi Murata, H. Sasahara, Shinichi Niki, Masunosuke Tsunada. Except for, I think, Eiichi Murata, all of them were killed during the retreat to the north. No? Yeah, okay. Next. So I'd like to thank all those who helped us in this book, especially the Sumitomo Foundation. Sumitomo Foundation provided funds for me to do the research here, and the USC Cebuano Study Center, the Cebu Nikkei office, my colleague, Dr. Taihei Okada of Tokyo University. It would have been totally impossible to get to the Japanese records because I do not read kanji. So imagine, all the memoirs are all in Japan at the Diet Library. And then at the Nikkei Jinkai, Sylvia Kawabata Apuado, Marben is acknowledged. Also, the 3 doctors of the commission, other than me at the Cultural Historical Affairs Commission, Dr. Elena Alboro, Dr. Clodoveo Nacorda, and Dr. Hope Yu. Thank you very much.
Sir, lingkod mo lang dito. Ay. Thank you very much, Dr. Bersales. And now let us hear from the co-author, Taihei Okada, who earned his PhD in Social Studies from Hitotsubashi University, is professor at the Department of Area Studies, the University of Tokyo. Recent publications include Benevolence and Colony, American Education in the Philippines and Its Legacies, published by Jose University Press in 2014. The Trajectory of Redress Movement for the Filipino Comfort Women, Its Early Stage, with his co-editors, Tonomura Masaru. Series for Developing Reconciliation Studies for Citizen Action, published by Akashi Shoten in 2022, and Facing Colonialism, Remaining Imperial Legacies, History section of the College of Arts and Sciences, the University of Tokyo, and Methods of Historical Studies, published by Iwanami Shoten in 2020. Please help me welcome Dr. Taihei Okada.
Okay, well, thank you so much for this fabulous book launch. And I'd like to express my gratitude to the honored guests from the mayor's office and the Japanese consulate and Tres Abril publisher, as well as the Palmgrass Hotel. And obviously my gratitude goes to everyone who came out to this event. As stated in the introduction, and as some Professor Jobers introduced, this work is overdue. You know, most of the survivors died a long time ago, especially the Cebuano wives. who were married to the Japanese, both the civilian Japanese and Japanese soldiers. At the same time, I think this work was a work of long time coming. I mean, we worked a lot for an extended period of time. Since I got to know Jobbers in 2018, especially, basically the last 4.5 years, we have worked off and on around the topic of a common interest, Japanese in Cebu, or what the Japanese did to the Cebuanos during the wartime, especially on my part, right? And it really was a learning experience for me. As a Japanese leftist historian, I'm grateful that I was able to work with a Cebuano scholar, and I really learned a lot, an important lesson from the Cebuano perspective. Instead of paying too much attention to the atrocities committed by the Japanese soldiers, which is a bit of cottage industry for the Japanese historians interested in the Asia-Pacific War, both Jobbers and I focused on the Japanese as a minority group among the Cebuanos. And I learned that it is important for the Cebuanos to rethink the perils and the ultimate demise of this small group of Japanese as an essential part of their Cebuano history. From the 1930s to 1945, it really was a dark time in Japanese history as well as in Asian history. And this history should never repeat again. Japanese invaded its neighbors and caused massive death and destruction, and she was militaristic and expansionist. Then 50 years later, after the end of war, in the 1990s, with the coming out of many wartime victims, especially the comfort women, and many litigations are filed against the Japanese government, this period maybe brought a profound change to the Japanese perspective on the Asia-Pacific War, so that it is, in a way, easy for us to denounce the attitude of the militaristic Japanese and atrocities caused by them. But it is more difficult for us to imagine what happened to the Japanese who lived among the Cebuanos and who shared their lives with the fellow Cebuanos and Chinese. And, there are many, many tragic aspects from my description. I guess, in addition to what I'm going to talk about next, I think one thing that is kind of struck me as so difficult to think is that, many of the Cebuano Japanese mixed heritage people, I mean, they just couldn't survive. I mean, sometimes, I couldn't really substantiate it, but it seems like some of the military sections targeted this population and they basically, killed them, right? So that was part of the story that, that is still to be discovered. And maybe one of the biggest tragedies that we discovered in the final section of this Japanese community is that, their children and young children, babies, they were murdered in rather systematically by no other than the Japanese military itself. I mean, to me, killing of their own children and babies for the sake of military needs is indeed an act of insanity, right? And when I think about the Japanese community here now, which is probably about 3,000, and plus tourists in the city of about 1.3 million people, the proportion is not much different from the proportion of the Japanese in the 1930s. And given this study, we realize that this is the second community of the Japanese in the history of the 20th century between the Japanese and Cebuanos. And I surely hope that, unlike the first community of the Japanese, this second community is going to prosper for a long time to come, along with the Cebuano people. And I'm not sure whether the history is going to repeat itself, but given this age of brutal war in Ukraine, I surely hope that such a tragic history of the 20th century will never repeat itself again. Daghan salamat.
Thank you very much, Dr. Okada. And now at this point, we would like to invite our authors to please sit down in front for our open forum. So we would like to invite our audience, both online and on-site, to give us questions for the authors and have an interaction with them. I'm sure you are very much curious about the content of the book. And if you need clarifications or more things to know more about the book. Yes, sir. Kindly state your name. We have a microphone over here.
Shout na lang. There. I'm Jason and I write for Super Balita, Super Suroy. I'd like to address this question to Sir Jobers. Sir Jobers, how different is this book from the previous books that you have written, whether it was about the Japanese or, some other,
This is actually related to the earlier work we did called The War in Cebu. And I got interested when I interviewed second generation Filipino-Japanese Oshiro Maximo in Mualboal. Because I was shocked that there was still a family that carried a Japanese family name, Oshiro, in Mualboal, who was very much alive. And his children were already in Japan working. Because you understand the dynamics of labor now in Japan, which probably Dr. Taihei can explain. There's a young generation now that's smaller, getting smaller, and an older generation that needs to be supported. And the Japanese are looking for Nisei or the second generation or third generation. And so I was shocked that he was very frank about his life in Mualboal, that his father was one of those who introduced Murami in Oslo, and that his father was conscripted, became a sergeant in the Imperial Japanese Army, and died in Dumaguete during the liberation of Dumaguete. And that his mother was not hurt by the people of Mualboal. Because in the aftermath, we write there that all of the Japanese were forced to return to Japan, including their Cebuano. The option for their Cebuano wives was to join them. But some wives actually stayed behind because they knew they could not get any support. So that's what I found in The War in Cebu. So we continued that into the book. Our main intent originally, as Dr. Taihei has said, he wanted to look at the atrocities. I said before the atrocities, I was thinking before the atrocities, there was a Japanese-Cebuano relationship that was very strong before the war. No? And many married, some of them married Japanese merchants. So there was that pre-war relationship, which was rent asunder by the war. So we had to trace what happened before the war and find out what happened during the war. And so this is a continuation in that sense of The War in Cebu. A cheaper version.
Thank you, Sir Jobbers. Any other questions from our audience to our authors? Take this opportunity to ask your questions, or probably you have some comments. Still warming up? Still thinking about the book? I hope you were able to grab a copy of the book. Later on, we will have a book signing with our authors here.
In adding to what Jobber said, one thing that we discovered and one thing that is often overlooked is that there are about around 600 Japanese civilians in the 1939 census, or 700, something like that. And then during the wartime, the exact number is not really written anywhere. So it's a little bit impressionistic. But the civilian Japanese, all in all, because many corporations came to Cebu too, was something like 1,700 right? So it's still very small. And then many military forces came over to Cebu, especially before the Battle of Leyte in 1944. The population of the Japanese soldiers went up as many as something like 15,000. So it's almost like 10 times as many soldiers here than the civilian population here. And then that really became the dominant image of the Japanese from, in the 1940s. And then, as I stated, that really caused a huge tragedy, not to the Cebanos, but to the Japanese community as well. So that is the basic message of this story, I guess.
I do have a question. I was struck when you said, Dr. Okada, about your perspective that you view the Japanese community here as minorities among Cebuanos. Like, what would be the prevailing literature that would be different from how you actually frame this one in your book?
Right. Well, there are many, many more Japanese in Davao and in Manila. So just in terms of Japanese population in the whole of the Philippines, Cebu was a sort of small pocket, right? But I guess the number really doesn't matter that much because, minority group itself is pretty important no matter what kind of ethnicity it is. So I think what we have accomplished here is that we really focused on this small group of people, and we have delineated a pretty thick history of this group. And also that just in terms of the history of Nikkei in Japanese here in the Philippines, it is often the discourse of Davao, right? So we wanted to show something else other than this Davao plantation economy. And also, as I said, just because this war happened, it really became a sort of different community during the 1940s from the 1930s.
Thank you, Dr. Okada. Anything to add, Sir Jobbers? Yes, we have a question over there. Thank you. Please introduce, ma'am.
Hello, sir. I'm Jaja. I'm from Waseda. As you said, I'm on spring break, kaya ako nandito. My question is, the last time we talked, you had a lot of stories, and I'm sure you had a lot of data. You have Cebuano, English, Japanese, and you were able to publish a very concise book. And I'm sure you have more stories to tell. So my question is, number one, how did you decide? How was the working relationship between two different authors? How are you able to decide what to put in that very concise book and what to set for later? And my second question is, what do you have for later? Because a while ago you said revised edition. So meron bang part 2?
What's more to come?
Thank you.
Thank you for that question.
Thank you. We decided, we agreed that I would write on the pre-war period and Dr. Okada would write on the World War II period. The World War II period is full of memoirs and a lot of published material, and including personal memoirs in Japan. But they're unreachable to us. We don't read kanji. Or if you can read kanji, it's very limited. You need about, how many characters? 10,000 characters to understand Japanese kanji, I think. So we decided that I would concentrate on what's available in Cebu, Jaja, and then see Dr. Okada would work with on the National Diet Library and what's the other one? Nagoya.
Nara. Yeah, Library Information Center.
So what's next? He just did an interview last week. He can tell you more of some of those who were here and some illustrations. Our purpose is eventually people will read this and then they will start talking. Like, for example, Masi just texted me now that she had an interview last week that the mother of Ma'am Humayda Humalon, the wife of Julian Humalon, the painter, the lepidopterist, who used to work in a Japanese store. So these are the kinds of data we would like to get out there once the book is out. As usually happens in a book like this, there will be people who will start coming out and saying that, oh, we had a neighbor who was Japanese, or we have Japanese blood. Regina, for example, is Yoma. I know she's Japanese, but she's not traced her Japanese ancestry yet. Audrey Tomada is Japanese. But I do not know why she cannot trace, because the Tomadas of Japan, there were Tomada in Leyte who were Japanese. So I think Audrey will be challenged. And then Jason Morata, who I am sure is related to Eiichi Morata, because he's Cebuano. No? And so these things we hope will come out now. There's also those memoirs that are coming out also, like the one you found, 𝐂𝐸𝐻𝐵. We hope that you can read kanji 𝐂𝐸𝐻𝐵. You will contribute to Cebu. I know you're working on Davao, but I also challenge you to work with us on Cebu. Because so many people have written on Davao already. Not so many, but you know, Davao, they have a museum already of the Japanese diaspora in Davao. There is no museum, for example, in Cebu on the Japanese. And I'm trying to gather all the materials I can find from Japanese surplus shops to eventually set up a pre-war Japanese museum, because the things sold in Japanese surplus shops today date to the pre-war period. There's so many of them that are thrown away in Japan. And hopefully someone will, or we can open a museum on the Japanese in the pre-war period, because that's a significant part of the Philippine economy. If you read part of the book, almost everything came from Japan. No, in the pre-war period, not just vases, but fertilizers, even food items. We were buying from Japan, and the Japanese were also buying from us. Your bakya comes from Japan. Bakya is a Japanese word. It's your wooden clog. It comes from Japan. Like as I said, your takuri comes from takuri, and your katol comes from Catoricenco. So the Japanese have influenced us. It is time to look back, especially now when we have 3,000 Japanese population in Cebu. No, that's a very potent force to help, re-educate people about also about what happened in the war, but also about what was life before the war, when we were friends with Japan and when we are friends now with Japan. No, things have changed. As Dr. Taihei Okada, things have changed. It's funny when you look at the news. It's China today that we are facing as a threat. Yeah, can you imagine? So things have changed. So Dr. Okada can say some more about what we hopes will happen after the book is published.
Yeah, well, I think there are two things that I want to say. One is that we tried pretty hard, but we really couldn't discover any unpublished manuscript for this work. And as 𝐂𝐸𝐻𝐵 is working on, I think Matsui family was affiliated with the Osaka Bazaar. So Osaka Bazaar was based in here. So many of the documents in that Matsui document is maybe about Cebu and Japanese community in Cebu. So that's one thing. And the other thing is that we discovered some Japanese names in the newspaper Hoko list. Hoko is a sort of tonarigumi, neighborhood association during the wartime. And then we put that all these names in the appendix. So we hope that some people can trace who these people were, and some of the lineage, the people in the lineage might come out to tell us more stories. So this is just maybe a beginning of this whole process of maybe retelling the Japanese history here in Cebu.
Jobers, thank you for making this book, writing this book. No, I am Noel Ponce. Noel Ponce, and what struck me was the census that you went through the different census And I suppose the Koreans who came to the Philippines were identified as Japanese. My grandfather came here in 1920s, and he was identified, I suppose, no, I don't have the record. I suppose he was identified as Japanese, no? So were you able to decipher which among these are really Japanese or Koreans?
Japan, Korea was under Japan.
Yeah, Korea was under
During
Japan
the
from
American
1905 to 1945.
So that's why it would
they
be,
were
the Koreans would be listed.
Yeah,
Your grandfather, no, was
yeah,
Korean.
he was, yeah. He escaped.
And
Oh, no, they came over in the
To Cebu nga.
1920s to Manila, then to Cebu.
Did he leave any memoirs? Diary, journal?
Gamay lang. But he did not associate with the Japanese. He worked with the Chinese, especially the Cantonese. Maybe because Korea and Southern Chinese were Cantonese speaking or something. Yeah. So you were able to decipher which among these population were, or it's really hard. I know.
Right. Well, one of the documents that I was able to find was some sort of pamphlet published by the Japanese embassy here, and it was published in 1923 or something like that. And then it showed the number of Japanese in Cebu. Well, it could be, yeah, it might be a little bit wider, but not in Cebu, but I can't remember the exact region. But that number was something like 800. And that included the people in Guam, too. And then this is the only document that listed the number of Koreans, that mentioned the number of Koreans, the number of Taiwanese. But I think the number of Koreans was something like 50 out of 800 Japanese. So in terms of proportion, it was very, very small. But even reading some of the military memoirs, there were some Koreans from the pre-war times. Like one of the records, if I remember this right, said that he used some civilian boats to go from one place to another. And then that owner was a Korean. So, but obviously, as a soldier's memoir, we don't really know the civilian's name. So that's one thing. And the other thing is that when the Japanese invaded the Philippines, there were many, many Koreans as auxiliary workers. You know, not exactly soldiers, but military employees who helped war efforts. So if you go through something called ATIS, ATIS is an Allied Translation Unit, we find a lot of Korean names in it. And actually, I tried to locate it, but I saw it long time ago, maybe 10 years ago, when I was helping my former advisor, Professor Nakano Satoshi, to do some research. He discovered some documents like some kind of interrogation records from the MacArthur Memorial in the United States. And then in that group of documents, there were some transcripts of the Koreans being interviewed by the US forces. So, I mean, the study about the Koreans, both the pre-war times and during the Japanese occupation, not just in Cebu, but for the whole of the Philippines, is still really needed, you know, but still under, you know, it's not really developed yet. And somebody really should do more research on that. So.
Bersales, yes, go ahead, Miss.
Hi, good evening. My name is Wendy. I'm a PhD student from UP Diliman studying psychology, and I'm really interested in how you feel the book can contribute to healing some of the wounds from within Japan, within the Philippines, specifically Cebu, that are related to World War II. Number one, if you feel it can contribute and how, and also if you feel it can contribute to fortifying relationships in modern day Japan and Philippines. Thank you. Sorry.
Right. I think it's a really painful history because, I mean, this a group of about 600, 700 people basically disappeared because of this war. And many of them got killed in the process. And I guess reading about this kind of tragic history is a good thing, because not just because it won't happen again, but it teaches you something deep in psyche, I guess. You know, it really happened that way. And especially, the last section of my chapter 4, it basically these mothers whose children got killed by the Japanese forces, they basically made a complaint against the officer who killed these children. And I guess, it's pretty well known that Japanese soldiers killed a lot of young children and babies among, of the Filipinos here. But they also killed the babies and children of the Japanese. So, it's really, really tragic in many ways. And it's not really black and white. So I guess, to see something beyond friends and foes is maybe important, because that happened, and that happens in a war situation. So I don't know. For me, though, this book goes beyond this binary between the Japanese and the Cebuanos or the Filipinos, because military is just so horrible in a war situation like that, and it just kills and kills and kills and kills. And I don't know. One thing that you might find it a little bit difficult to agree with, it might be that a lot of these Japanese civilians got killed, not by the U.S. bombardment, but also by the Filipino guerrillas. So I guess that kind of complexity is really important in this age, because it really shows people are not just certain nationals, but they have much more complicated identities. And there were some Okinawans who got killed, and they were refugees from Palau, and they got looked down upon by the fellow Japanese who resided in Cebu, especially the doctors. Doctors really looked down upon the nurses from sort of supplementary nurses from Palau. So reading that kind of section really, or even memoirs, really makes me think that it's not really equal. It's not really fair. It's not like the Japanese value other Japanese as fellow citizens, but they are pretty discriminate against the people with a different background, like Okinawa, or people, who participated in a not very honorable profession, like prostitution. There were some comfort women in that group too. So that kind of within group discrimination might be something of value from this book. Yeah.
Thank you.
I think the book will help heal, in the sense that people will realize that the Japanese were not here during the war only, that they were here even before the war, and they contributed to the economy, and we had friends. Our great-grandparents were friends of the Japanese. It's just the war changed everything, and everybody did not like to remember that kind of friendship in the past. As Dr. Nakorda has said, his grandmother was friends with Japanese. But after the war, you cannot say, I had Japanese friends. This was all erased because of what happened to the war. What Dr. Taihei Okada writes in the chapter on atrocities is that it did not happen only to Filipinos. Even the Japanese themselves suffered in the war. That nobody actually is a victor in the war, in any war. That at the end of the day, it's he who wields a gun that has power, regardless of nationality. This is the same thing going on now in Ukraine and between Ukraine and Russia. It's not the soldiers that are suffering. It's the civilians in Ukraine who are suffering. And you can imagine those of ethnic Russian background within Ukraine, they must be suffering now. from the Ukrainians themselves because they are Russians inside Ukraine. So in the same instance, the book talks about the atrocities done by the Japanese among their own people, among babies that they massacred, they killed, poisoned while they were retreating. It's vividly described there how they did that. But they included mestiza women who were half Japanese, who were also massacred by the Japanese. The United States government was not interested in prosecuting the case because it involved Japanese against other Japanese. So it was brought to Japan. No? The cases were filed in Japan against the Japanese. There were also, so Japan at this time was not monolithic in that sense, as Dr. Taihei says. This was not a single homogeneous society like the way you find Japan today. There was discrimination, no, against Japanese who were from other places. And that showed within as they retreated. So the priorities of who should survive, who should not survive, was going on even within the Japanese community. And the sad fact is, after the war, we could no longer trace what happened to the 300 Japanese who were here at the start of the war, and all the owners of the bazaars. They all disappeared. They all died. And we would have wanted that they wrote about their experience. They're available, according to Dr. Taihei Okada, most of the available memoirs in Japan are written by soldiers of their experience in Cebu, not even describing the city or how it looked like or how Cebuanos looked like, but how they felt about the war. So that's not useful for the book because they talk about how the difficulty of retreating and all that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Right. Well, can I say one more thing? Yeah, but one thing that I really didn't understand, or I understand it, but it's difficult for me to realize the mentality is that, especially women and children, as the Japanese were being defeated by the U.S. soldiers after March 26, after the landing of the U.S. forces here, they could have surrendered to the U.S. soldiers. And some of the volunteer unit, the commander of this volunteer unit had them surrender to the U.S. forces because, children and women, they were weak and there were no fighting forces. So they could have surrendered. But many of them basically went along with the Japanese military forces. And then that was a condition when this killing of babies and young children took place. So it's just so intriguing. As a ordinary Japanese living in a peacetime now, that they know that their military is being defeated, and they know that if they're going to follow the Japanese military, they'll be killed, just like the soldiers. But even in this condition, they wouldn't surrender to the U.S. forces or the Filipino guerrillas. So I guess, in a strange sense, I really appreciate now that there is no war, because once a war happens, people are really divided in terms of enemies and friends, or in terms of my nation and your nation. And then no matter what, you cannot surrender to the other side. So I guess, I think it's, as Jover said, it's a good time that this book came out now, because a similar war is taking place between Russia and Ukraine, and there's definitely a sizable Russian community there, much more than the Japanese community here. So it kind of, makes us understand why the Russian minority in Ukraine is in such a difficult situation.
Thank you so much.
I'd like to acknowledge the mayor of Cebu City, Mayor Mike Lopez Rama. Thank you for coming, Mayor.
All right. Actually, we have one question, Dr. Bersales and Dr. Okada, on our Facebook page. So we are actually having an Facebook Live right now. This question is from Ferdy Aparticio. He is from Taguig. And this is his question. Was the plight of the comfort women, especially in Cebu, included in the book? And what reparation were extended to them? Was there an official apology coming from the government of Japan?
Yeah, well, yeah, it's a very complex history in itself. One thing that we are a little bit proud of in this book is that we could actually find the locations of these comfort stations. So there's no denial that there was no comfort women here. They were here, and also that it's right. Actually, there are lots of sexual violence that took place committed by the Japanese. And I was able to find one victim from the town of Cordova. But it's kind of difficult to talk about this person because, I mean, she was not recognized as a comfort woman, but she was nonetheless a victim of rape by the Japanese soldiers. So that's how the situation went. And also that there is no record as to whom the Asian Women's Fund was provided when the Japanese government decided to give out this donation money to the Filipino comfort women. So that's where it is now as far as comfort women is concerned. But there are some memoirs left by the Korean comfort women who worked in Cebu. So that's something you might be interested in pursuing if you are interested in this issue.
The book does not talk of the post-war period. Therefore, we do not discuss whether the government of Japan apologized or not. As it's clear from the title, we end in 1945. And by that time, there was not yet any discussion of comfort women.
All right. Thank you very much again, Dr. Okada and Dr. Bersales, for answering those questions. I think at this point, we are very much honored to have with us this evening the very honorable Mayor of Cebu City, Honorable Michael Rama.
Maayong gabi. Kumbawa. Dumore ka to gozaimasu. Ipo sa mga Pilipino. Actually, when you talk about Japanese regime, Japanese being in the Philippines, particularly Cebu City, I have a book of my grandfather, Jobers, and thereat, of course, you always look back. And then I was also looking at when we were celebrating Charter Day, then there was such a thing as, even before war, there was already Japanese in Cebu. And the testament was, there is, as what's the name of the store? No, there was a specific. Not that only Tokyo, Nippon. And that brings us to years 1900. And I saw that looking at what happened, we were only, as far as I'm concerned, because I read the book of my grandfather, his own handwriting. And just sad that the bombing came over, but the one who kept on bombing, and we knew that from my recollection, was it the Japanese or the American? The American. That's the reason why I look back, I feel bad, I feel sad, because 26 years of the newspaper of my grandfather. He was already into writing at the age of 15 years old. As editor-in-chief, 18 years old. And he just had thought it's about time that he should do his own so-called publication. And it all started, you could imagine, 26 years back during the war, and the war came in what year? 1942. 26 years back. That was how the book of my grandfather have been, because he has his own so-called newspaper, 3. And then at the same time, Jobers and Dr. Taihei Okada sang. I've always feel what this war can bring to us when there was should have been no war at all. Yes or no? Yes or no? There never was an orientation of Cebuanos being belligerent. My grandfather was a peaceful man, but I'm just happy not one of my relatives, but it was in the book, and I don't want to tell you the narration. But I wanted to check what was the time when the Japanese came. Of course, definitely, it's all on trade, business, and for sure, it was for peaceful purpose. Sakto ko? Ha? Yeah, so you give me the book now because I have to leave. I have to leave, you know. I have another. This morning, Louie, I was already working. Then early this afternoon, from morning, I was at 9th floor. Then this afternoon, talking about peace and order, fire and safety. Of course, I have to come because I'm a historian. I love history. Yesterday should never be forgotten. Yesterday should be a lesson, and that lesson should be embedded in our head and practically in what I call put it in the repository in our heart. And with that, look forward and let's be, because Kaso-sang is my friend for 20 years, right? Jatik, see? Can you give him a round of applause? Yeah. If there was no friendship after, I would not have been able to talk about, we were about to come up with a retirement for the Japanese, because a lot of Japanese would want to come back to the Philippines, to bring back what was yesterday. And that's why I am here. Look at me as a friend. And I always be a friend because I'm a peace-loving person. I love my country. I love United Nations. I love Cebu City. I love Cebu. Thank you very much. Hip hip. Okay, go.
Mayor, we would like to invite Mr. Kazuhito Matsuda to also join our authors to give a copy of the book to the Honorable Mayor of Cebu City, Michael Rama. Madam Tax Commissioner, Dr. Louie Nacorda and Sir Jimmy C. And Miss Marty to join us over here. Thank you very much, Honorable Mayor Rama, for gracing this momentous occasion with us. Congratulations to Dr. Reynes Bersales and Dr. Taihei Okada for their newly launched book, the Japanese Community in Cebu, 1900 to 1945. We would like to present a copy of the book, please, Dr. Okada and Dr. Bersales, to the Japanese Association of Cebu, Mr. Kazuhito Matsuda. On behalf of the Tres de Abril Incorporated and Palmgrass de Cebu Heritage Hotel, I would like to extend our gratitude to all of you who made time for this event this evening. Thank you very much, and we hope to see you again in our future book launches. The book is now finally available for sale starting today at the Basahanan ni Lumaya here at the lobby of Palmgrass de Cebu Heritage Hotel. Daghang salamat ug mayong gabi. You can go here in front to have your books signed by our authors. Thank you very much. We will also be serving some snacks for our participants.